The world of technology, computers, and computation, it's changing all the time. And it's really easy to get lost, to wonder what skills should I learn, how should I advance my career, what are the things I can do to participate in that changing technology, to be on the cutting edge. Well, what if I told you that the best way to be on the cutting edge of technology is to use something that's been around for dozens of years, to learn something that you can use across a wide range of computational devices, not just computers, but smart devices, IoT, Internet of Things devices, and even for AI programming. And that is Linux. Now, specifically, it's UNIX. Linux is UNIX. UNIX is Linux. That's a whole history lesson in and of itself. But effectively, UNIX was the first unifying operating system so that somebody could learn an operating system and work on multiple computer systems or computational devices. And Linux is a clone or a derivative of UNIX. So they're effectively, if you learn Linux, you've learned UNIX. If you learn UNIX, you've learned Linux. But how do you go about that? How do you begin the process of learning Linux if it's so important? And why would you want to learn Linux? Well, let's start with the last question first. Why would you want to learn Linux? Because it powers most computational devices. And I'm using that word very specifically. Computational devices are so much more than just computers. They could be things like a smart device. They could be things like an industrial device or an IoT device. It could be that you are powering some sort of computational device that runs lights or audio or whatever the case may be. We're all familiar with computers and computer operating systems. That would be things like Windows or Mac OS X. And Mac OS now. It used to be called Mac OS X. Some people called it Mac OS X, Mac OS X. It's just Mac OS. Anyhow, once they switched over from Mac OS 9 to Mac OS X or X, that became a Unix-based operating system. In fact, Macs are effectively a very, very nice version of Unix. They have a lot added on to it, but at the heart of the Mac computer is Unix. So if you're a Mac user, you could just go into a terminal prompt and you could just start using Unix directly from the terminal. But there's a risk in that. And the risk in that is that if you do something wrong, you could really blow up your operating system, and at best you'd have to reinstall everything, and at worst you'd have to kind of rebuild right from scratch. That would be a hassle, but you don't want to do that. You want to practice and you want to learn in an environment that's safe, contained, but still allows you to have a full Linux operating system that you can practice all of your skills with. And there's many ways to guide you through that skill building, but of course the first thing you're going to need is an operating system installed so you can start practicing. And it's always tough. You want to learn something new, but in order to learn something new, you have to build an environment, and building the environment can be challenging. Well, that brings us to this video. In this video, I'm going to talk about using Parallels, which is a virtualization tool on Mac that will allow me to install other operating systems on my Mac. Now, I've made multiple videos here on the channel using Parallels. I've been using Parallels for a long time. I think pretty much since Parallels came out, for a very long time. And I really do like it. They've sponsored videos here on the channel, and they actually have discounts all the time. So I'll go and put some codes in the comments. I think they have some really good discounts right now at the time that I'm making this video for Black Friday. So I think 50%, 35%, some really good discounts. That said, it's a great tool to get in order to practice working with Linux. So let me show you how to set up a Linux machine in Parallels, all of the different choices that we have when we're setting up a Linux machine in Parallels, and then we'll be able to learn Linux I'll make other videos on learning Linux and provide you resources on that. But let's get it installed so that we have that learning environment to start with. Let's go take a look. I have Parallels open on my Mac, and I install Parallels on every Mac that I own because I really do use it quite a bit. I am especially using it a lot for having both Windows and Mac running on the same hardware. So you look here, if you don't have the control center and you install Parallels, you can open it up, go to the window and make sure you have the control center, and that'll give you the control center where we can do things like add new operating systems or configure ones that we already have installed. You can see in my case I have a Windows machine running on Parallels. I have a Mac OS testing machine, which is a clean installation of Mac OS on a virtual machine. But now I'm going to install my Linux onto this machine so that I can start learning and practicing Linux. Now I also usually have a number of virtual machines that I will store on an external hard drive, and I can import them into Parallels as I need them. So here we have, Windows 11, I could start a new installation. If I have a disk image file, an ISO file, I can install that into Parallels as well. Now you do have to remember that I am running this on Apple Silicon, which means that I cannot take an image file for what's called an x86 operating system or one that would normally run on Intel. That's getting a little bit into the weeds. If you're interested, comment down below. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit in the comments. Or if you'd like a full video on the different architectures of the chips, let me know. But in this video, we're just going to install Linux so that I can begin the process of learning Linux/Unix. So here you can see I can download Mac again. I can have different versions of Linux. Now, there's Ubuntu Linux. There's Ubuntu with something called Rosetta, which allows me to run different programs within the Ubuntu distribution. And when it comes to Linux, all Linuxes are the same kernel, and they have different distributions. This is very similar to how Mac OS handles its Unix. Unix is the core of Mac OS, but Mac and Apple create a very nice overlay on that with applications and interface and all of that good stuff. The same thing applies to a lot of Linux distributions. So a good example here is Ubuntu Linux is a fantastic Linux for anybody who's just starting out. It's a full version of Linux, but there's a nice user interface, a graphical user interface that will allow you to navigate through that Ubuntu environment and get familiar with different programs and such. A pure Linux installation would just be a command line, very similar to the terminal in Mac OS. So you can see I've got a number of different Linux distributions here that I can download. There's Debian in here, there's Kali Linux, and if I had one that I wanted to install that wasn't here, I could go in and grab the image file. I would just have to make sure that the distribution that I chose was a distribution that was capable of running on the Mac Apple Silicon. So it's going to be an ARM distribution. So for now, we're just going to install a nice version of Linux. They're all nice, but this one here is particularly user-friendly for people that are starting out. And I'll just choose Ubuntu Linux and I'll say continue. And it'll go in, it'll tell me how much space is going to be required. The size of the package is 3.35 gigs, 7 gigs. I want to make sure that I have enough space on my computer for this, so I'll go ahead and download it. And it'll take a few moments to download that 3 gigs, depending on the speed of your internet connection. And then once it's downloaded, it'll begin the installation process. So now that it's downloaded, it's going to unpack that download, and it's going to begin the installation process. You'll also notice that it's unpacking it for the ARM64 environment. That's the chipset. So if you are looking for a disk image file for some other version of Linux that you might like to learn, then what you'll want to look for is the ARM64 image file. That's a little bit more advanced, like I said, so comment down below. We can have a discussion around that. Or if you would like me to install a different version of Linux, let me know and we can maybe do a video on that. We're going to stick with Ubuntu. That's a great beginning place. That's a great place to start. Quick thing about the Ubuntu operating system is that it's really designed to be an operating system that can run on inexpensive hardware, which really allows it to be distributed all across the world. Linux is a free operating system, so it's an open source community that develops it. A lot of the programs, a lot of what we do with Linux does not have any additional charges into it, so you're not paying licensing fees and such. It's community developed. And that can be really important if you're trying to build a solution for education or if you're trying to build a solution for testing and development. You know, Linux and UNIX is everywhere. It's actually by far one of the most dominant operating systems if you count computational devices, not just computers. So now it's unpacked here, and we're going to go in here. I'm not going to disconnect it, okay? So we'll go ahead and say okay. And you can see that it's now going in and it's beginning an automated install of the environment. It actually went in. I'll go into Parallels, so I'll click on Parallels. The first thing it's going to ask me to do is to put in a new password. I just put in my super secret password, and now I'll retype it. And as long as I got it right the first and the second time and remember it, I always use a special password. You shouldn't do this, but I'm only using this for testing and development, so I usually have the same password that I use just for training, testing, and development before I delete machines and such. So here we go. I have to put in authentication. Now in this case here, it wants me to put in my authentication again here, so let's put it in. And it's going to install something called Parallels Tools. This is a very useful thing to have, and one of the compelling reasons why I like to run this within a virtual environment, because it allows me to drag and drop documents and files to and from my Mac computer into that environment, that Ubuntu environment. So it allows me to say, okay, I've got a document, let's say, for example, on my Mac. I want to look and see what it would look like in an Ubuntu environment. I can just drag it over. It makes things a lot easier. You can also see that it wants to work with my Dropbox, which is my cloud files, and I'll allow it to do that. So it's going to ask me to restart because it does need to have that agent running when it first boots up. So it's now going to restart Parallels, prompt me for my password, and then we'll take a quick look at the Parallels environment, or the Ubuntu environment running inside of Parallels. Go ahead and pop in my password. And now you'll see that I have this really nice graphical user interface that I can then start learning the different aspects of Linux. Now, this isn't in a video where I'm going to go through all of the different aspects of learning a new operating system, but one of the things I will recommend is that you start with the basics. You could use an AI agent like ChatGPT or Claude or any of your preferred ChatGPT, generative chat. Let's try this again. Your generative AI tools, and you could use any of the ones that you'd like and say, give me a list of 10 steps to learn a new operating system. And it'll be the same. Generally speaking, the first step would be how to install the operating system. In my experience, that usually takes more effort and time, and that's why it's really nice to have Parallels do this through an automated script like we just saw. But then it's going to be how to manage files in an operating system, how to copy files, how to move files, how to create directories, how to create users, how to configure security, and on and on. So there'll be a list of things to do. And you would do those no matter what operating system you were learning. With the Ubuntu distribution here, I have a graphical interface. So if I go into, for example, my files, I'll get the same type of interface that I would have with Finder on a Mac or with File Explorer on a Windows machine. So you can see we got directories and such in here. But one of the things that I might recommend you do here is you can go in and certainly use this environment here. There'll be a little bit of, work to go through and understand where things are. But if you go into your applications here, you'll notice that in Ubuntu, just like in a Mac, we have the terminal window. And here's where you can start going in and you could, do an ls, which is the list command. And then you could go in and you could do remove directory, change directory, create directory. Some of these commands will be very familiar to you if you ever had to learn DOS on Windows. Generally, Mac users have never had to work from a command line unless you're doing some advanced work, which is kind of the entire point of learning an operating system like Linux, UNIX, so that you can do that more advanced work. And a lot of times, if you're working with AI or if you're working with any type of sysadmin, any of the really more advanced computational things that we might do, certainly we're not going to put a graphical user interface on a smart fridge. Well, We might, but we generally don't. And if we did do that, it would be a customized graphical user interface, and it would be designed for the fridge. That's getting a little bit into the weeds. Again, this video is not a tutorial on how to learn Linux. It's just talking about how to set up an environment so that you can begin the process of learning a very valuable skill. Now we have a Linux machine installed, and we can begin the process of learning how to work with Linux without endangering or causing any harm to our host machine, our Mac computer. I can still use my Mac computer, I can still do all the things I want to do for my day-to-day work, but I now have this nice sandbox for learning that I can start learning Linux. And, you know, as I learn Linux, you'll find that I can drop to the terminal window in my Mac and do a lot of things, and I unlock a lot of power of controlling my operating system. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.